Hello, my name's Ann Despain, and I'm here to present your review of the Recognizing and Reporting Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation class. Each year, by mandate by the governor, every person who works in a congregate setting must have a class regarding abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable populations. So you'll listen to this recording with this PowerPoint, and at the end there'll be a test. When you take the test, I'll be able to access that, and that will take care of this requirement for another year. Thank you for joining me. Maltreatment. Maltreatment can consist of abuse, which is something you intentionally do, which causes harm. Neglect, something you intentionally do not do, which causes harm. Or exploitation, which is the act of selfishly taking advantage of someone. Is abuse, neglect, and exploitation always easy to identify? No, it's not. And that's one reason that we need to learn more about recognizing and reporting abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Abuse against people with disabilities. Out of 100 cases, only 33 will get reported. Of those 33, there's only enough information for 17 to be investigated. Out of those 17, only 10 will have enough information to result in arrests, and only 5 of those will have enough information to be able to be prosecuted. This means that in 95% of the instances, abuse goes unprosecuted. And in the material that the state has that we present to the members, one of the statistics in there states that out of those who are abused, neglected, or exploited, over 50% of them will face it more than 10 times in their lifetime. That's something we've just got to stop. There's some common reasons that abuse goes unreported. First of all, the victim didn't recognize they were being abused. Unfortunately, the perpetrator grooms the victim so that they think that this is what everyone like them has done to them. Everybody's favorite uncle does this. Everybody's favorite neighbor treats them this way. And so they don't recognize that this is abuse. The victim also didn't know how to report the abuse. We know that in 90% of the time, the abuse, neglect, or exploitation happens from someone that the person knows. And so how would they know then who to trust to report that to if already someone that they trust is doing this to them? Also, it may make them worried if they tell that it will make the abuse worse, or that person may begin to abuse them. The victim believed that nothing would happen. The perpetrator grooms them to say, go ahead, tell people. No one will ever believe you. I've already told everybody that you make up stories. And so they believe nothing would happen. The victims were threatened or they were afraid. So the perpetrator tells them, go ahead, tell them, I'll make your life even worse. Or they may say things like, if you don't let me do this to you, I'll do this to your sister, and it will be your fault. Or tell them things like, fine, go ahead, report it. If I get thrown in jail, then what's going to happen to you? You'll have no place to live and you'll be out on the street. There are characteristics of an abuser. Often the abuser has displaced aggressions. They have an inability to control their impulsivity. They have a history of exposure to abuse. We know that sometimes abuse is cyclical. They were abused as a child, and when they get in a stressful situation, they react or act in the same way that they were treated. Even if they don't like the way they were treated, they don't know any other way to handle it, or that's just what they resort to, or they think, well, I lived through it, this person will too. They may need to have they have the need to control the other person and to tell them everything to do and to be in charge of it. Authoritarian, believing that they know what's best for the person. They also lack attachment to they could lack attachment to the victim and feel like, well, they're not going to live a full life anyway, or they don't feel pain, or no one will know, and so it won't matter. And again, devaluing the person. Well, they really aren't going to have the same kind of quality of life that I have, so it's really not going to matter. Many of you have already taken the prevention and support class, and in there you listen to a video about a boy named Tyler Green. And at the beginning there's a boy talking, and then it switches, and Tyler said, "Are you surprised? You shouldn't be. I'm just a typical teenage boy." And he talks about all the things that he has done that other people have helped him be able to do and enrich his life. I contrast that to Martin Pistorius, who wrote a book called Ghost Boy, and he was unable to speak and for many years felt trapped inside a body. No one knew that he had intelligence or that he understood. And unfortunately, when he was in that situation, he was abused over and over and over and over again. Later, he learned how to use a computer to communicate and told his story. And it's just heart-wrenching. And I often think, what is the difference between those two? Yes, one could talk and the other one couldn't. But I think it goes a lot deeper than that. One had a support system of loving people surrounded him that helped him to have a full life, that gave him the opportunity to have different experiences. And the other one, the people around him just treated him as an entity, one that didn't feel or have any needs other than just the physical needs of feeding and changing that they took care of. We definitely want to be the person that helps the individuals we support, like Tyler Green's support system, instead of allowing someone to be abused over and over and over again. So what is reasonable suspicion? Well, reasonable suspicion is the victim discloses this information to you, indicating abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Seeing unexplained, non-accidental injuries, or an explanation that's inconsistent with the injuries. Yeah, his jaw's broken. He did that to himself. We know that that is not the case. Jaw injuries are very rarely from self-inflicted injury. Someone provides reliable information that there has been abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Mandated reporters are people who have a responsibility for the care of a child, an incapacitated or vulnerable adult. These include but are not limited to people in the following roles: medical professionals, social services, educators, legal, and law enforcement. Remember, we are mandated reporters, not just while we're being paid to work with the individual, but 24/7, we are mandated reporters. If we do not report, then we can be held just as liable as the perpetrator. We must report. So what can we say? Remember that we're not here to investigate. We need to avoid asking detailed questions. We can ask, how did this happen to you? Where did this happen? When did this happen? If the person is asked to relate the story over and over and over again, it may compromise the law enforcement's ability to be able to prosecute. People can say, oh, they were coached by somebody, or when they are asked by law enforcement, they don't respond the way that they did the first time that they related it, and so it compromises the investigation. It's really important that we don't try and investigate that. We just report and let the experts do the investigating. Just like we would not want the person who is being abused, neglected, or exploited to be punished, we would not want to punish those who report. And so there are whistleblower protections in place both on the federal and state level. There are laws that will protect the person who reports from retaliation. We would report to the Department of Child Safety if the person is 17 and younger, or we can do this by calling the phone number listed or by reporting online. If the person is 18 and older, we would report to Adult Protective Services. We also can report to law enforcement, and that would satisfy the reporting requirement, especially if the person is in imminent danger. We would be calling 911. One thing that this training requires is that we go through some scenarios. So let's talk about David. David's age 42, and he's an individual with a disability who requires constant supervision. He's upset and he hits Larry, who's the group home manager. Larry says, "Ouch, don't hit me." Larry walks away and asks another staff member to stay with David so he can take a break. So should this situation be reported to Protective Services? No. What documentation needs to be completed? An incident report. Scenario number 2. Mom brings Michael, age 7, to the day program. You notice that he has a black eye. His mother explains that Michael has bad allergies and itched his eye too hard. Michael's bleeding disorder, von Willebrand disease, is documented in his care plan. Should this situation be reported to Protective Services? No. But what documentation needs to be completed? An incident report. Scenario 3. Kevin is a 32-year-old person with cerebral palsy who uses a wheelchair for mobility and requires assistance for eating, dressing, bathing, and meal preparation. Kevin attends a day treatment for adults. A DTA staff member uses his phone to record Kevin eating and sends the recording out to other DTA staff commenting that they posted it on YouTube. Should this situation be reported to Protective Services? Yes. And who would you report that to? Adult Protective Services? Yes. Scenario 4. Tony, age 16, is an individual with cerebral palsy. He's been learning to walk independently. At the 90-day planning meeting, you notice he has a 2-inch gash on his shin. When asked about it, Tony said he hit the edge of a coffee table. Should this situation be reported to Protective Services? No. But what documentation needs to be completed? An incident report. Scenario number 5. You recently observed Sandy, a 12-year-old girl with disabilities, grabbing at her genitals and the genitals of her caregiver. Sandy also talked to her caregiver in a seductive manner, which appeared to embarrass her, and she asked Sandy to stop. Sandy's never exhibited this type of behavior prior to this incident. Should this situation be reported to Protective Services? Yes. And if so, who would you report this to? DCS? Yes, Department of Child Safety, because she is 17 years or younger. Scenario 6. At DeMarco's person-centered service plan meeting, you notice bruises in the shape of a hand on his right arm. When you ask about it, his caregiver says DeMarco bumped his arm against the wall. DeMarco is 25 years old. Should this situation be reported to Protective Services? Yes. Who would you report this to? You're right, Adult Protective Services. So, how can we prevent abuse, neglect, or exploitation? We can educate ourselves and others. We can be aware of signs leading to reasonable suspicion, and we can report and bring this to the attention of those who can investigate and go on to prosecute. We need to be sure that we lead by example. Remember, the individuals that we work with have all the same rights that we do. We would never want to be abused, neglected, or exploited, and they have the right to have a full life without abuse, neglect, or exploitation. You can make a difference.